What now, Dr. Morbius?
Prepare your minds for a new scale of physical scientific values, gentlemen.
So you have top physicists working on crazy stuff, anti-gravity.
Most physicists don't know this story.
Yeah.
Right?
In this example, that the more I ask why, it gets interesting after a while. That's my idea, that the deeper a thing is, the more interesting it is.
There are actually updates in physics, maybe mid-century, that were not disclosed to the public.
Well, I mean, it quieted down because nobody ever got anywhere, or it quieted down because they did get somewhere and it went black.
In 2016 in Nature Materials, and look, from 1987, we still don't know much more about this in the white world.
But I've never heard of it. It's probably, if they did develop something like that, it's probably classified physics right now.
Right.
I mean, I still can't believe that that's true.
It would only be if it were the case that, in fact, we have mastered anti-gravity and they're being built by aerospace corporations, then new physics would have to be involved.
The role of aerospace companies as holders of potentially basic scientific knowledge not shared with the academic world. Is it possible? It seems very wrong to me.
Maybe wrong, but it's true.
It is true. You believe it's true?
Yeah, I know it's true.
It's the bit of electrodynamics you're not allowed to know.
To not share that knowledge with the physics community would be seen as gross academic and intellectual malpractice.
Yeah, if somebody had that level of knowledge, I mean...
And so you begin to get a very interesting understanding of the world and all its complications. In order to if you try to follow anything up, you go deeper and deeper in various directions.
This gets to the issue of advanced science being indistinguishable from magic. And then the idea that this is, in some sense, held by particular silos over other silos. I mean, as a scientist, I either want to laugh or my blood boils.
Well, I mean, that's kind of a justifiable position.
That they're into, they're fucking fascists, is what they are, you know, and that's what they're into. And they think that it's perfectly appropriate. If they think it's perfectly appropriate to engage in utilizing their military and their intelligence resources to garner privileged access to the strategic raw materials of the planet. What else is there? I mean,
and basically, 9 months after he handed over this technology to the pseudo-government entity, private entity, Science Applications International Corporation, where anything useful was put so you couldn't do a freedom of information on it.
Certainly aerospace corporations have knowledge in the UAP area that specifically are sequestered against FOIA because of proprietary labels, which the whole thing was set up to be that way on purpose.
Very strange. It's hard because it's clear that there's some element of psyop here, and then it's hard to sort of separate.
There has to be psyop.
There has to be.
Now, when you explain a why, you have to be in some framework that you allow something to be true. Otherwise, you're perpetually asking why.
And as we pointed out, the phi field is probably being used. We also point out that you can use the A field, the so-called vector magnetic potential field, in a different manner from what is presently known in ordinary electromagnetics. If you will check, for example, Feynman's 3 volumes of physics, you will check in the 2nd volume, you will find that an experiment was done to see whether or not the A field was a mathematical figment or whether or not it was a real fundamental field of nature. The experiment proved conclusively that the A field, even when separated from the del cross operator that yields B field or magnetic field, is indeed a fundamental new field of nature.
When you are trying to come up with this analogy between electromagnetism and general relativity to explain some of these effects, are you dealing only with the Levi-Civita connection of the metric as Einstein did, or are you considering...
I'm basically dealing with the metric coefficients by postulating a dielectric vacuum whose dielectric constant values for, say, epsilon and mu, the permeability and permittivity of the vacuum, can be manipulated. And once you manipulate those, you're manipulating C, which is 1 over the square root of mu epsilon. And so once you begin to manipulate C, then you can change effects associated with all of the, and so you can, with this polarizable vacuum approach, which I published in Physics Journal, you can get all of the quote tests of general relativity and so on. So,
in other words, the present A field that's in the theory is used totally, always coupled with a magnetic field. We have not explored the use of the uncoupled A field whatsoever. But every magnetic circuit, for example, that has a coil in it, with the current going around through the coil, has a swirling A field in it. And we can, if we wish, disconnect that A field from the magnetic field, in which case we have a new kind of field, presently unknown and unutilized in Western technology. So the combination of the phi field technology and the A field technology will yield the full extent of the Tesla technology.
All kinds of toroidal geometries, for example, where you have no EM fields whatsoever, but you have strong vectored scalar fields. And since you have no Lorentz force in the absence of E and B, then how can you detect them? Well, you detect them by any kind of quantum detector that can detect phase shifts, can detect the vector and scalar potential even in the absence of fields.
Now, the other thing I noticed in here is you're using gravity wave A and gravity wave B focus fields. Mm-hmm. In the stuff we were working on, the field we would generate was in a toroidal field that would curl.
Well, that's exactly how this was generated. It was essentially in a toroid around the craft.
Ah, okay.
And I will show you examples of this from physical experiment. But it's at the intersection of this torsional rotational structure and the tor on the level above. Okay, this area here is called the non-radiating boundary. It's very specific, and from that non-radiating boundary there is zero electromagnetic waves being transmitted when the structure is properly formed. Only the scalar and vector potential is able to go through here. So this is basically like a Star Trek shield.
Say, okay, suppose I treat general relativity, Einstein's equations for general relativity, the way I would treat Maxwell's equations for electromagnetism. If we could manipulate variables in Einstein's equations the way we manipulate variables in Maxwell's equations, you would see certain kinds of things which tend to match claimed observations of UAP phenomena. Somewhere there's a missing key for how you can do manipulation of those variables in Einstein's equations without having to have a black hole in your pocket.
So the assumption that you first make up, that you start off with, is that electricity, gravity, and magnetism is unified. Now that's consistent with the zero-point field model, it's consistent with the polarizable vacuum model, and it becomes the heart of the electrogravity-magnetic model.
So EGM is intended to do, it's intended to give engineers a tool by which they can understand and modify gravity.
If mass is the result of electromagnetic discourse between particles, then there's every reason to suppose that by interfering with that discourse you can modify the mass.
We use electromagnetic fields that we apply into interference patterns that generate accelerated reference frames. When we have an acceleration, that acceleration is equivalent to gravity, just because of the equivalence principle in the same sense. So what we engineer with EGM is, by similarity, equivalent to a gravitational field.
I'm wearing dark glasses today because I'm seeing the future and it's looking very bright.